This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome. Welcome to the May monthly partnership meeting of the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership, or SCDRP for short. Good morning. My name is Heather McCarthy. It is a warm, sunny day in May here in Jacksonville, Florida. In my position here as the Executive Director of SCDRP, I am here to serve you and our region. My virtual door is open all the time. Just shoot me an email or book a virtual appointment with me. Today, I am delighted that you are here for this hour of knowledge sharing and networking. Thank you for joining us. So here's our agenda for today. First, I have an SCDRP staff update for you. Second, I am excited to announce the upgrading of several SCDRP online resources. And then an action item for you. Tell us who you want to hear speak during our SCDRP Partner Picks Summer Speaker Series. And then next, we will hear from today's super speaker, Lauren Schmied from the Engineering Resources Branch in the Risk Management Directorate of FEMA, the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency. And then the final minutes of today's meetings will be partner sharing. So please be ready to share your relevant regional news and announcements, and feel free to drop announcements into the chat box at any time today. We will gather them and add them to our next SCDRP newsletter. Speaking of newsletters, you have probably seen this name come across your inbox already. Let's give a warm welcome to our new SCDRP Program Coordinator, Claire McGrath. Wave, Claire. Claire earned a BS in biology from Mount St. Mary's University and brings 9 years of nonprofit experience to the SCDRP team. Claire's passion for environmental justice stems from her experience working with vulnerable populations and her personal commitment to climate resilience. Claire has served as outreach coordinator, community life director, and project manager with L'Arche Jacksonville, a nonprofit that empowers and supports people with disabilities. Claire oversaw L'Arche Jacksonville's Emergency and Disaster Response Plan, which underscored to her the importance of building resiliency plans that protect the most vulnerable members of our communities. Claire has also worked with Student Conservation Association to provide high school students in urban areas with opportunities to gain conservation work experience. She has also worked as an adaptive kayak guide with environmental traveling companions to provide people with disabilities and youth from under-resourced backgrounds with environmental education and outdoor experience. Claire lives in Atlantic Beach, Florida with her husband and pets. She enjoys anything that gets her outdoors, especially surfing, kayaking, and backpacking. Claire, would you like to say a few words to our partners?
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. And I just want to say thank you to you all for welcoming me into this space. I've really enjoyed getting to know some of you so far, and I look forward to getting to know more of you. I'm really excited to be here and just honored to be in a room or a virtual room with so many people doing such awesome work for climate resilience, amid emergency preparedness, and environmental justice. So I'm looking forward to learning from all of you. And again, I'm just very, very grateful to SCDRP and to all of the partners for the welcome and the opportunity to work with all of you. Thanks, Heather.
Fantastic. Of course. Thank you, Claire. And we're so happy to have you on the SCDRP team. So welcome aboard. A few announcements. If you haven't visited our SCDRP website lately, please do so. Our website is being continually updated to reflect the evolution of SCDRP and the needs of our region. On our homepage, you will find a bit of background on SCDRP as an organization. We have added our refined and updated vision and mission for the next 3 years. And don't forget, you can always find the SCDRP member directory under the Resources tab. And we need your permission to add your contact info to the member directory, so please create an account and opt in if you want to be included. As you scroll down the SCDRP homepage, you will find a description of our philosophy, including the services that we provide to the region. Also, this year, the partnership adopted a set of foundational core values. These core values are ideals and principles which guide and inform the way SCDRP operates day to day. And these 4 core values are the foundational beliefs that drive future directions and priorities of the partnership. Together, we believe in 1, collaboration, facilitating innovative partnerships that cross boundaries and disciplines. 2, learning, building capacity in our region through knowledge sharing, peer learning, and convening. 3, equity, encouraging diverse and inclusive participation in all activities across languages, cultures, and political boundaries. And 4, support, facilitating access to and pragmatic application of both science and actionable information in support of our vision that communities across the U.S. Southeast and Caribbean will be more resilient to impacts due to climate change, natural hazards, and disasters. So please peruse our website. Claire and I are updating it all the time. Another online resource that I am excited to announce, the video recordings from our SCDRP 8th annual meeting in Savannah, Georgia back in January are now available on the SCDRP YouTube playlist. These recordings include keynote speaker and civil rights environmental justice champion, Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. You'll find snippets from our interactive data tools and technology exhibition and recordings of all 8 sessions, highlighting unique public-private partnerships, strategies to address inequities and effective community engagement, and insurance and finance innovations for today's high-risk landscape. I encourage you to explore the resources available on the SCDRP YouTube channel. And one more exciting SCDRP announcement. We are launching the first ever SCDRP Partner Picks Summer Speaker Series. During the months of June, July, and August, SCDRP will be showcasing speakers of your choice. And we already have gotten some fabulous speaker suggestions. So don't miss out. Submit your ideas today. The deadline is tomorrow. So shoot us a quick email to scdrp@socorro.org to recommend a speaker. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you today's super speaker, Lauren Schmied. Lauren Schmied comes to us today with almost 20 years of experience in coastal engineering and flood hazard and risk analysis, both in the United States and globally. During the last 5 years, Lauren has served as a coastal engineer in the Engineering Resources branch of the Risk Management Directorate of FEMA, the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency. At FEMA, Lauren supports the Risk Map program as a subject matter expert on the coastal zone. She leads the coastal data development efforts for FEMA's Future of Flood Risk Data Initiative. And within this initiative, Lauren is focused on technical innovations and interagency partnerships. And Lauren, I'm sure our members will be very interested in hearing more about those interdisciplinary partnerships that have been forged during this project. Prior to working at FEMA, Lauren worked for a number of coastal engineering consulting companies in the U.S. and Australia with a focus on coastal modeling and analyses. Lauren has a master's degree in coastal engineering from the University of Delaware. And Lauren joins us today live from Houston, Texas. Lauren, a warm welcome to you and a big thanks for taking the time to share your knowledge and experiences with our partnership today.
Good
And now,
morning.
good morning. And now I'm making Lauren a presenter. You should now be able to share your screen, Lauren.
Perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the invitation to come and speak with your group about FEMA's Coastal Future of Flood Risk Data Initiative. And I appreciate everyone taking the time this morning to come and listen. So with that, I'm going to dive in to my topic today, which is the Future of Flood Risk Data Initiative from FEMA, specifically the coastal portions. So we're going to walk through a little bit about what is the Future of Flood Risk Data, how that relates to FEMA's mapping program and the coastal components of that, and then we're going to dive a little bit into the data and modeling foundation and the analysis, and a little bit on the visualization. So with that, what is the Future of Flood Risk Data? The way that we have defined the Future of Flood Risk Data Initiative is grounded in 4 key objectives. First, there is a shift from a binary hazard and risk analysis, so is a structure in or out of a certain floodplain, to a probabilistic one that depicts hazards in a graduated manner and incorporates the uncertainty of those predictions. Second, FEMA aims to modernize the management and delivery of flood data through the creation of dynamic, flexible services and tools. Ultimately, these resources should empower stakeholders in the private sector, our cooperating technical partners, and other state, local, tribal, and territorial entities who would have a role both in the development and deployment of these tools. And finally, increasing the access to rich hazard data should ultimately drive the risk-informed mitigation, adaptation, planning, and insurance actions that are key to the success of the National Flood Insurance Program. Together, these 4 objectives can drive a more risk-informed National Flood Insurance Program, one that works for many types of users and decision-making scenarios. In order to make this initiative a reality, the foundations need to be strong. So FFRD is ultimately rooted in engineering and analysis, and that technical foundation drives the types of products, services, and tools we can offer our stakeholders. So the explorations to date have really been focused on asking ourselves how we can support those stakeholders and users of flood data, and how do the engineering models and methods employed further those goals. So rather than just focusing on trying to derive the product or tool from our existing data, we are striving to understand the needs and priorities, and pushed us to rethink the ways in which we undertake those analyses and the engineering foundation of the development of flood hazard and risk data to enable those wider arrays of benefits and applications, while still supporting our regulatory and statutory requirements of the NFIP, and be as flexible as those advances in science and technology evolve. So today I want to focus a little bit on the coastal application of what we're talking about in terms of engineering models and data, as well as the retrieval, processing, and analyses that have gone into it. So in order to be able to really contextualize what the future of flood risk data involves, we have to kind of understand the existing and requirements of the FEMA coastal mapping and generally the mapping program as a whole. So our metrics included mapping 100% of the populated coastline of the United States. And so we can see from this map that to a large extent, we have succeeded in that. There are still, most of the data has been completed, and we're sort of waiting on processes to make sure that that goes live. within that, within the current mapping program, we have been focused on our statutory requirements to produce flood maps and the special flood hazard area within the FEMA flood insurance study process. This process has resulted in FEMA firms, which most folks would be familiar with on the left. And those firms really focus on the development of zones, base flood elevations, and lines that determine essentially where properties and structures fall within a deterministic approach. And so when I say deterministic, it means are you in or are you out of a specific zone with a specific elevation. However, while this is the product that has been the focus in our existing program and continues to remain a focus because it is a requirement, components of the process can be leveraged and augmented to support those goals of shifting from a sort of binary depiction of hazard and risk to the more comprehensive, graduated and probabilistic depiction. Within the coastal study, the base flood elevation, so those elevations that are depicted on the flood insurance rate map, really has 4 components that go into that overall elevation. The storm surge still water elevation, along with wave setup, as well as the wave height above that elevation, and if applicable, any run-up elevation that's above the storm surge elevation. The first 2 components, the storm surge still water elevation and wave setup, are typically derived on the east and Gulf Coast, including the Caribbean islands, are derived from coupled 2D hydrodynamic and wave models combined with a statistical approach for the modeling of tropical and extratropical cyclones. These methods have been developed over the years in close partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers and really make up the core of what we call the intermediate data submittals of the flood insurance study process, intermediate data submittals 2 and 3. And because these 2 components are based in that sort of 2D model and statistical representation, they are already set up within a framework that can provide that sort of representation of a graduated response of still water and wave setup, storm surge and wave setup responses. Those 2D models typically extend inland to the extent of the storm surge inundation with a relatively high level of spatial resolution to resolve flow pathways and storm surge inundation. The statistical models used, including the joint probability optimal sampling method developed in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers, can represent the likelihood of potential occurrence across the frequency space, incorporating, building on the historical record and climatology, but expanding that to represent all potential scenarios. And while in the firm mapping and FIS process, these methods are typically used to derive those end level binary values. The fundamental basis of this process serve as useful building blocks for understanding that shift from a binary hazard depiction to a graduated and probabilistic depiction of coastal flood hazards. So once we sort of look at that process, our existing process as a foundation, we started to look at how to modify, augment, or enhance those methods to build for the future of flood risk data. And as I stated, that the framework, the modeling and statistical framework for storm surge quantification in the FEMA FIS study has been developed over the last 20 years in close partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And as we looked towards the future of flood risk data, that partnership continued to evolve to utilize advances in statistical representation through developments of meta modeling and uncertainty quantification developed with our partners at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and used within their development of the data published on the coastal hazards system. FEMA looked to expand this and augment it spatially and robustly across the Atlantic and Gulf study areas. Again, utilizing that representation of the possibility of tropical cyclone impacts that are built on the existing the historical climatology of tropical cyclones, but expanding that to not be limited by the historical record. This has resulted, sort of coming out of the application of these methods for the high resolution 2D modeling conditions, this shows the sort of power of these data in the sense that we have this high level of spatial resolution of storm surge and wave hazards across the study areas. And at any given point within those study areas, we can derive both the information surrounding the frequency of occurrence for storm surge level and wave height, as well as a robust quantification of the uncertainty and variability that would be expected at any given point. And I'm going to walk through a little bit about the sort of power of what that data can provide. So here's a relatively simple example of sort of how that shift from binary to probabilistic data can be used within an overall risk-informed decision-making process. So here I have sort of the graduated depiction of flood hazard in terms of probability of flooding, as well as an overlay of our existing regulatory flood insurance rate map. And as we look at sort of two sites that are relatively close in proximity, when we look at site A, we are really kind of still looking at a site that is within the coastal A zone, so meaning that at a 1% annual chance that site usually would contain flooding, and a site within an X zone which may not flood at that 1% condition. If we only consider the BFE, that is essentially the only information that we have. We have, let's say, a base flood elevation at site A, and we have the idea that that site B does not flood at that 1% condition, but may still be in, a 500-year condition. If we think about how that could be, and we do typically have, planning criteria within these sites right now, and one of them being like you could use the BFE as a minimum standard, you could apply a freeboard to that, or you could use a 500-year elevation as sort of higher standards to do planning for elevation. But if we think about this in sort of a more, in terms of the probabilistic output from an FFRD level approach, we have a lot more information that can help to inform that decision making at those two sites. Not only the BFE, but we can also pull out different frequency levels. We can evaluate the comparison of those different frequency levels at a best estimate. And if depending on the level of risk tolerance at the site, we could consider things like uncertainty on either the 1% level or another frequency. And that expands our knowledge outside of, let's say, a freeboard value, for example, 3-foot freeboard or a 2-foot freeboard, which doesn't actually give us any information about how much risk we are actually mitigating when we apply that value. And that 3-foot for a BFE, even at sites that are relatively close, can actually have a big difference in terms of what level of risk it's actually mitigating, whether you're mitigating to the 500-year condition or you're mitigating beyond and incorporating more uncertainty. Sorry. So, as we've looked through this too, one of the things that we have been focusing on is examining how would you process this volume of data, because what I'm talking about is a lot of data, right? All of these curves at every single point at a high spatial resolution. It can be a little bit daunting about how you would actually engage with and utilize that data, especially as we talk about stakeholders that have different needs and different priorities and different levels of technical expertise. So one of the things that we have been working on recently, and I saw there are some folks on the phone that have been working with our as our PTS contractors and working on a lot of these sort of prototypes and visualization, is being able to create some examples so that as we engage with internal and external stakeholders that would be utilizing and engaging with these data, we can provide examples of how one might visualize or interact with it so that it can sort of spark that brainstorming of how to use these things. And so as we're doing that, like what I'm going to show in the next couple of slides are really kind of prototypes and examples, and not necessarily, you know, the final end products or deployed systems. But again, that intention is to really kind of gain the feedback from our stakeholders so that we can develop things that are going to be the most useful. So the first thing is to essentially get these data that are at this, you know, these point data into things like rasters and storm surge depths that can be integrated into kind of like visualization prototypes that folks understand. So being able to represent depth grids, wave height grids, inundation polygons, and polygons of, let's say, the AEP conditions, right? So the annual exceedance probability or return period. And then further leveraging that within modeled sea level change scenarios that have been dynamically modeled and dynamically processed within the statistical framework of these data. And I'm going to now, so that's sort of the base data creation. I'm going to show you a little bit of a, demonstration, and I will walk through it as I play. Okay. All right, so here's a demonstration of a sort of prototype visualization tool that has been developed. So this is St. Tammany Parish in Louisiana. And so you can see those initial depth rasters on the left. And as you look, you have the ability, like the user would have the ability to change the annual exceedance probability, you know, depth raster, and you can see the extents changing as it moves up and down from higher frequency to lower frequency. And then you can also similarly toggle to, let's say, a wave height and see the same kind of changes in extents over the AEP. Now, one thing that we have been working on is the development of something that's, let's say, a metric that incorporates both those wave hazards and storm surge depth. And that's still kind of a work in progress. Similarly, we've been looking at things like looking at those polygons of AEP rasters, and this composite coastal hazard is that integrated metric, but annualized. So if we kind of zoom in to a smaller area, we'll start to dive into what we have been like thinking about could be utilized within this type of framework. So if we look at two sites, so one site around here, one site over there, over here, we can actually click on and get sort of site-specific information about these two sites if I'm planning to construct something, for example. So at each of these two sites, you see that we have kind of a ranking of what maybe the storm surge hazard looks like. And you can zoom in to the site and look at the details of what the data behind that site is. So if we set 0 as the underlying ground elevation, you can start to see the best estimate of the annual exceedance probability or return period. And again, that estimation of variability and uncertainty. And so as you kind of scroll over it, you can look at the range of what conditions may or may not be expected at that site. And then similarly toggle over to the other site and get estimations around that. And once we can actually then go in and say, let's compare a couple of these sites, look at what the differences are. And you can see these two sites actually have relatively similar storm surge depth response curves over the annual exceedance probability. And we have the confidence levels turned off just because it gets too messy, but you can turn them back on. But then when you look at the wave heights, there is quite a difference between these two sites, mainly because of some of the blockages of the wave propagation in this area. And so that could inform decision-making, as you sort of look at more than one site. One site is going to be more susceptible to, wave-based hazards versus the other, and that may, inform things like building decisions or even site decisions. So as you look at those comparisons, you can see the sort of AEP of flooding is actually quite similar, but the overall hazard is different because of that sort of change in wave energy. And that is sort of visualized a little bit in this composite, this annualized integrated hazard evaluation, which is still kind of a little bit of a work in progress, but you can kind of, this sort of overall one layer map does give you that information and parsing it out kind of into different components that helps make that decision. All right. The last thing on this demo that we're going to look at, you can see within here, you see the outlines of different building footprints, and those building information are derived from the National Structure Inventory. So if we select a point that actually is on a building, right now we have kind of loaded in some of the information that is from the National Structure Inventory about that particular structure. So in this case, it is on pile foundation. The NSI is defining the first floor elevation as this orange line here. And you can see how that intersects with things like your hazard. This is still very much a work in progress, and we're still definitely considering other components and how, again, sort of how folks would interact with that type of thing. And the next thing that I'm going to go through, which is not even really even demoable at this point, but is still sort of being worked on, is this integration of those future sea level change modeled scenarios into how you would visualize that within this sort of probabilistic framework. And there are some ways that you can kind of build on what was done, what I just showed in the demo, but also incorporate things like slider bars to see the differences between a current condition and a future sea level change condition at any given AEP, or specifically looking at change layers at a specific AEP with waves and things like storm surge depth. And then also really kind of looking at how you would evaluate that within a time horizon. So we may have only dynamically modeled 2 to 3 scenarios, but can you use some level of interpolation and in combination with the 2022 interagency sea level change projections published. You can toggle between, let's say, the intermediate high or the intermediate and kind of look at a specific site what time horizon would be associated with something like storm surge depth. But these are all still very much in development. And so more to come on that for sure. But this is just a sort of example of some of the things that we have been thinking about in this space, and also and yes, and that is I want to focus on the fact that like we are still very much in progress on a lot of this work, and it has been nice to again really focus on those engineering models and analysis methods. And as we start to work through like the power of that data and the how different users and different stakeholders would interact with it, it's really important to sort of gain feedback as we go through that process to be able to build the requirements to make sure that when that things are usable. So with that, I'm gonna end, and I appreciate everyone's time, and I'm gonna turn it back to Heather and Claire if anyone has any questions. My email is also listed here if you want to read it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren. Yes, it's time for a little question and answer time with Lauren. And so please raise your virtual hand, type your question in the chat box. Claire's going to be monitoring the chat box, and I will do my best to direct questions to Lauren in the order in which they are received. And Roderick, I see you first up.
Mr. Jump In. Hi, good morning, everybody. Rod Scott with the flood mitigation industry. I was just up in New York State. Thanks for the presentation. It's great. We see some private industry really reaching out into the slider thing and some of the AI work that's going on out there. So we are very appreciative of FEMA really getting into this reality of the future conditions because our job is to retrofit buildings so they don't flood and ultimately relocate millions of buildings when that time comes. So the question is, when I was up in New York State, Region 2, after Sandy, piloted this incredible project. We've got to have, our industry has to have ground elevation next to the building somehow, as close as we can get, to extrapolate primary budgets before construction plans are even considered for adaptation of the older structures, the pre-flood map structures, 3 or 4 million of them sitting in U.S. flood zones. So after Sandy, they came out with this incredible advisory flood map program with some advisory map levels plus LIDAR. So you had a ground elevation of some sort, fairly close. Back then it was less accurate than it is now with our LIDAR. And we've got to have that in order to extrapolate how much a potential project, adaptation project, would cost, because it's directly related to how high we're going to have to protect or adapt the building. Is there a discussion of integrating that information? I know LSU Flood Maps, the only one state-based in the country, also does a ground next to the FEMA flood map. And so we can say, oh, an elevation would about cost this much. That's my question.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So some of what I was showing, that is all based on the processing of the, let's say, modeled and elevated water surface elevations and wave heights with respect to a high resolution DEM. So that elevation is sort of baked into the analysis, but I do think that I can see there being value in ensuring that that elevation that's pulled at the structure is noted, right, for your purposes. So right now, I believe I'm going to share again if that's okay. I'll go back to
And thanks for using St. Tammany. That's where I live, and we've been unable to approve flood maps since post Katrina in '08, which is ridiculous. That's a whole nother topic.
Oh, I think it's actually in the demo. So when I did the demo, which is going to be about 4 minutes here. So when I pulled this structure, for example, right, and I'm able to look at the details of that structure. So what it actually pulls here is the first floor elevation from the NSI, but the ground elevation relative to that structure is defined to be 0. Does that make sense? So what we could do is ensure that instead of just zeroing it out, that elevation is also just kind of published there as
Yeah,
well,
because the
right?
ground does this, and buildings are built on the ground, and we just
Yes.
need a differential number to start with. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roderick. And Heidi Stiller, good morning. You're up next.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Lauren. This is awesome. I can't wait until it's out. I have 2 questions. One is how, if at all, this is going to relate to risk rating 2.0, or if this will be completely separate. And then second question is whether you guys are also trying to include erosion. I know USGS has been working hard to model some of that, so curious about both those things.
Those are both good questions. The first question is the purpose of the data development is to support the overall implementation of the National Flood Insurance Program, including rate setting. However, I cannot comment as to details of that at this point.
Understood. Yep.
And then with respect to the second question, how does erosion get integrated? And it has been, I would say that is currently an active question. There's kind of 2 different components, right? And FEMA in our existing mapping program has typically considered episodic erosion on dunes to be part of that overall mapping process. And there are sort of maybe simplified up to very complex ways that episodic erosion could be evaluated in a graduated standpoint. We have been looking at those. There's sort of a lot of different open questions. I could probably talk for another 20 minutes on it. And then there would be the other component of it, which would be how does long-term erosion tie into especially those future conditions scenarios. And that is something that, and first of all, and second of all, how would you represent that in a graduated manner that is actually useful? And so those, I don't have answers to those questions, and I know USGS has been doing a lot of work associated with that, and we certainly want to be leveraging that. But I do think that it's just all I can really say is we haven't necessarily made any decisions surrounding those things quite yet, but we are considering them.
Okay, really appreciate it. I'm gonna sneak in one more. Are all of the tech report scenarios in there, and can a user choose which one they want?
Are all of the which?
The sea level rise scenarios from the tech report, are they all in there? And can you choose?
We haven't fully built out the prototype. I want to say that we have included all of the scenarios, but I have to probably go back and confirm that.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Lauren. Any other questions for Lauren?
I would just add one thing to that. Like when we did the modeling, we did not do a sort of life cycle based modeling. We did a static sea level change. I don't want to call it a scenario. A static sea level change value. So say 2.5 feet, 5 feet, and then what we're doing is actually backtracking that to the various scenarios and interpolating. Eventually, we're going to kind of look at doing an inference model on it. But so it's not the modeling is not done in time, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
I have one kind of big picture question for you, Lauren. First, a phenomenal amount of impressive work. Thank you for sharing this with us today. And we have seen different mapping strategies come forth, and it's fascinating to see this shift from the binary to the probabilistic maps in nature. And it's interesting that you still have to be tied to the binary maps for certain to meet certain statutory mandates. But also, in my question is, in your viewpoint, what are kind of the long range implications of this shift to more graduated probabilistic maps?
I think that from my perspective, when framed in a way that is usable, that the level of data can drive decision making that is based in a sort of risk informed approach, right? So I have a critical facility, my risk tolerance, I really want to make sure that I am limiting my risk tolerance to what I consider appropriate for that facility. In this way, it has a component that like you can understand that it's not just a specific thing plus three, right?
Right.
That it's that you know how much risk you're actually absorbing when you make a decision based on that information. I think that's really kind of the power from a
Mhm.
decision making standpoint.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lauren. Any more questions for Lauren? All right. Lauren, would you mind dropping your email into the chat box one more time in case any of our members want to reach out to you afterwards? And thank you so much, Lauren, for taking the time to share with us today about FEMA's Coastal Future of Flood Risk Data. It's fantastic work.
Yes, thank you all for taking time and for the engaging questions. I appreciate it, the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lauren. And now it is partner sharing time. Let's use these final 9 minutes or so to share what's going on in our region. So please turn on your camera and your microphone. We love to see you. And feel free to post links and announcements in the chat box. What announcements do you have today?
Hi,
Dwana,
Dewan,
yes.
Dewana Brockington from the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. And my announcement is simply that we have finally onboarded our resiliency manager, and they are with us today, Erica Xavier Bouvois, and that's the individual that will primarily represent the corridor in the future.
Oh, fantastic. Erica, nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. Other announcements? I see a few have popped up in the chat box as well. We have Alyssa, would you like to speak to yours?
Sure, I can speak to it. Sorry, my internet was kicking me off all day yesterday with my camera active, so just to
Okay.
keep my internet working. We have our final hurricane awareness webinar today that is being presented by NOAA's Southeast and Caribbean regional team. It's free, obviously it's virtual, but open to everyone, so feel free to share it out. It's going to be at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and we are going to hear from our marine debris response specialist in NOAA about marine debris and hurricanes. So just wanted to plug that.
Awesome. Fantastic. One of the greatest challenges is dealing with the debris after a storm. And certainly, I hope some of our Caribbean partners tune in. It's certainly always a challenge on the small islands and small island nations throughout the Caribbean. Other announcements in the chat box that we should highlight? George, I see you have one in the chat box. Oh, and
Yeah,
Roderick.
so I've mentioned this program in the past. It's a Department of Energy program managed by NREL. It's the Energy Transition Initiative program, and it's focused on helping remote island and coastal communities build energy resilience, and provides technical support. And this year, you can also actually get funding for your community and helping to plan and support that energy resilience. So applications are open. The links in the chat, and I think they're due on the 10th of July. Rory put the point of contact for the Southeast region with NREL. So please reach out to him with any questions. And it's a great opportunity to kind of engage with your community and work on energy resilience.
Fantastic. Thanks, George. Yeah, that is an excellent opportunity. And Roderick, I see your hand up. You're
How about
muted.
off mute? Yeah, off mute. Thanks, Heather. We had an amazing announcement today or this week from NOAA. The Climate Ready Workforce Grant was issued RFP last fall. We got asked to submit. We have submitted our Resilient Workforce Development Program. Our industry has no education curriculum. We don't even have a Department of Labor classification for elevating buildings and dry flood proofing buildings. It's such a new industry. We've been approved for full funding for our workforce development, curriculum development, and then a pilot deployment into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers mega project in Lake Charles, Louisiana. We're accessing some private foundation funding to deploy it into Norfolk, Virginia, and then also south end of Long Island, where the Corps of Engineers has another mega project funded. Corps of Engineers has over 100,000 buildings, individual building level projects now in process of evaluation and then funding to elevate and dry flood proof. They've told us $250,000 within 10 years. We are going to create a workforce similar to the space program, a couple of 100,000 tradespeople that'll make good wages in adapting buildings so that we just stop the buildings from flooding now. All sorts of other decisions in the future as we go, but it's these older buildings getting flooded every time that's crippling us because we're constantly in recovery of buildings and people and devastation. So that's our goal. That's what's happening, and we're pretty excited. There'll be a formal announcement, and we'd love to come back and do a program on what we see this all rolling out in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roderick. Other announcements from our region?
Heidi, I saw you put a couple things in the chat box. Did you want to speak to either of those?
Sure, thanks. For the insurance nerds out there, I just came across a report, which actually came out last year, on recommendations for the insurance industry. It's a really good report. Highly recommend. Some interesting, thought-provoking ideas in there, and a really nice emphasis on nature-based solutions, and good articulation of how we need to understand the value of mitigation investments, so we can price insurance accordingly. So recommend that one. And then the other one in here is that the Coastal Inundation Community Practice is hosting their first quarterly webinar coming up next week. It's going to have a focus on vulnerability assessment. So there'll be case studies and resources. So I put the link in there. You can scroll down if you want to register for that one. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Claire, for pointing those out, and thanks, Heidi, for speaking to those. Other announcements. All right. If you do think of any, certainly shoot us an email at scdrp@socorro.org, and we will add those announcements to our next newsletter and get those circulated out to folks in our region. So thank you, everyone who shared, and we will further share announcements in our next newsletter. So this concludes our May monthly partnership meeting. A very special thank you to our super speaker, Lauren Schmied, and thank you for joining us today. Next time I see you on June 27th, we will kick off our Partner Picks Summer Speaker Series, and I can't wait. Enjoy the rest of your week and long weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.